The early morning fog hung thick over Los Angeles International Airport as Terry Crews made his way through Terminal 1, pulling his carry-on behind him. He was heading to New York for a charity event supporting young artists, something close to his heart, given his own journey from struggling artist to Hollywood success. At 6'3", and built like the former NFL linebacker he once was, Terry naturally drew attention wherever he went. But today, he was dressed casually in a simple gray hoodie and jeans, hoping to blend in during the cross-country flight. Flight 447 to JFK was already boarding when Terry reached Gate 23. He presented his boarding pass to the gate agent, a friendly woman who smiled and said, "Have a wonderful flight, Mr. Crews." Walking down the jet bridge, Terry felt the familiar mixture of gratitude and disbelief that still hit him sometimes. 20 years ago, he'd been struggling to pay rent, taking odd jobs while pursuing his dreams. Now he was flying first class, to speak at events that could change young lives. As he entered the aircraft, Terry was greeted by the captain, a veteran pilot named James Morrison, who recognized him immediately. "Terry Crews! My kids love your movies," Captain Morrison said warmly. "Thanks for what you do, especially speaking out about important issues." "Thank you, Captain. That means a lot," Terry replied with his characteristic genuine smile. But as Terry moved toward his seat, 2A, he noticed one of the flight attendants, a middle-aged woman with short blonde hair and a pinched expression, watching him with obvious disdain. Her name tag read Sandra. "Excuse me," Sandra said sharply as Terry approached his row. "I need to see your boarding pass again." Terry handed it over politely, though he found the request odd since he'd already been checked at the gate. Sandra examined it with exaggerated scrutiny, then looked Terry up and down dismissively. "This doesn't look right," she announced loudly. Enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Are you sure you're in the right seat?" Terry felt the familiar knot form in his stomach. The same feeling he'd experienced countless times growing up in Flint, Michigan, when people made assumptions about him based on his appearance. He'd hoped those days were behind him. "I'm certain. This is my seat," Terry said calmly, pointing to 2A on his boarding pass. "Is there a problem?" Sandra's voice carried across the first-class cabin as she spoke to her colleague, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We've got another one trying to sneak into first class. These people think just because they're big and intimidating, they can sit anywhere they want." The words hit Terry like a physical blow. Several passengers turned to stare, some looking uncomfortable, others curious about the unfolding drama. An elderly white businessman in seat 1C shook his head and muttered, "Unbelievable. Security should handle this." Terry felt his face flush, not with embarrassment, but with the controlled anger he'd learned to manage through years of therapy and personal growth. He could feel every eye in first class on him, could sense the assumptions being made. "Ma'am," Terry said, his voice still calm but firmer now. "I'd like to speak with your supervisor." "I am the senior flight attendant on this aircraft," Sandra replied haughtily. "And I'm telling you that I have serious doubts about your ticket." A young mother across the aisle whispered to her teenage daughter, "Is that Terry Crews? From the movies?" The daughter squinted, then nodded excitedly. "Mom, that's definitely him!" But Sandra either didn't recognize Terry or didn't care. She continued her power play, now blocking the aisle and creating a scene that had drawn the attention of passengers throughout the cabin. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step back while I verify this situation," Sandra announced. "We can't have people just wandering into first class." Terry looked around at the faces staring at him, some sympathetic, others judgmental, all waiting to see how he would respond. This was a moment that could define not just his flight, but potentially influence everyone watching. He thought about his children, about the young people he was flying to inspire, about all the times he'd spoken about responding to adversity with grace and strength rather than anger. Terry took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. He could escalate this situation, demand to speak to the captain, or make a scene that would likely end up on social media within hours. Instead, he chose a different path. "You know." "What?" Terry said, his voice carrying clearly through the cabin. You're absolutely right to be cautious." Sandra looked surprised by his response, as did several passengers who'd been watching the confrontation unfold. "Security is important on flights," Terry continued, pulling out his phone. "Let me help verify my identity." He opened his camera app and switched to selfie mode, then turned the phone so Sandra could see the screen clearly. "My name is Terry Crews," he said simply. "I'm an actor, former NFL player, and I'm flying to New York today to speak at a charity event for underprivileged youth about overcoming obstacles and treating people with dignity." Sandra's face went pale as recognition dawned. "I understand you're doing your job," Terry continued. "But I want everyone on this plane to hear something important." The cabin had gone completely silent. Even passengers in economy were craning, their necks to see what was happening in first class. Terry's voice filled the space, warm but powerful. "Every single person on this aircraft deserves to be treated with respect, regardless of what they look like, where they come from, or how much money they have." He looked directly at Sandra, but his words were for everyone listening. "We all make assumptions sometimes. I've done it too. But when we let those assumptions turn into actions that hurt others, that's when we have to step back and ask ourselves, what kind of people we want to be." A businessman in seat 3B started to clap slowly, and within moments, several other passengers joined in. Sandra stood frozen, clearly mortified, as she realized the magnitude of her mistake. "Ma'am," Terry said, gently, "I forgive you. We all have bad days, and we all deserve second chances." The applause died down as Terry continued speaking, his voice carrying the wisdom of someone who'd faced adversity and chosen growth over bitterness. "I want to tell you all a story," he said, settling into his seat, but keeping his voice projected, so everyone could hear. "When I was growing up in Flint, Michigan, I faced situations like this regularly. People would see a big black kid and make assumptions about who I was, what I was capable of, whether I belonged." The cabin remained completely silent, passengers hanging on every word. "For years, I let that anger eat at me. I thought the world owed me something because of how I'd been treated. But I learned something important. How people treat you says everything about them and nothing about you." Sandra stood nearby, tears forming in her eyes as Terry's words sunk in. "The young people I'm flying to speak to today, many of them face these same challenges. They'll be judged by their appearance, their background, their circumstances, and they'll have to choose, every single day, how to respond." Terry looked around the cabin, making eye contact with passengers of all ages and backgrounds. "We can respond with anger, with bitterness, with the desire for revenge. Or we can respond with grace, with forgiveness, and with the determination to be better than what we've experienced." The elderly businessman who'd earlier agreed with Sandra's actions now looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat. "Sandra," Terry said, turning to the flight attendant, "I want you to know that I don't hold any grudges. We're all human. We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do next." Sandra stepped forward, her voice shaking. "Mr. Crews, I am so deeply sorry. There's no excuse for how I treated you. I let my own biases cloud my judgment, and that's not who I want to be." "Thank you for saying that," Terry replied. "That takes courage." Captain Morrison's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We've just witnessed something beautiful in our cabin today, a lesson in grace, forgiveness, and human dignity. Mr. Crews, thank you for showing us all what true strength looks like." As the plane prepared for takeoff, something remarkable happened. Passengers began introducing themselves to one another across racial and social lines that had seemed invisible before. The young mother brought her daughter over to meet Terry, not for a celebrity selfie, but to thank him for the lesson in character. The businessman from 1C approached Terry during the flight. "I owe you an apology too," he said quietly. "I made assumptions, and I was wrong." When they landed in New York, Sandra approached Terry one final time. "Mr. Crews, I've been thinking about what you said the entire flight. I want you to know that I'm going to do better. I'm going to be better. That's all any of us can do, Terry replied with a smile. As Terry walked through JFK Airport toward his next destination, he carried with him the knowledge that sometimes the most powerful response to hatred isn't anger or revenge, it's grace, forgiveness, and the courage to help others see their better selves. That afternoon, as he spoke to a room full of young people about overcoming obstacles and choosing love over hate, Terry shared the story of Flight 447, a reminder that how we respond to adversity defines not just our character, but can inspire others to rise above their own challenges. If this powerful story of grace under pressure and the choice to respond with dignity instead of anger moved you, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring true stories. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that our response to adversity defines our character. How do you choose to respond when faced with unfair treatment? Let us know in the comments below. Your story might inspire someone else to choose grace over anger.